So this interview is basically just practice for me. I'm a social work major,
Okay.
and so with that, we have to practice doing interviews because, as you know, we do a lot of those as social workers.
Right.
And so this whole class is kind of, it's called social practice. So we're practicing pretty much everything in this class's focus is interviewing. And so today I'm going to be getting some stuff from you about your social history as far as your profession goes, and just kind of getting a better idea of all of that. So
Okay.
with that, I wanted to start off by asking you what drew you to working in the field of social work?
I think mostly to help people.
Okay.
I've always been a helper to animals, people, whatever situation
Mm-hmm.
came up. I never really looked at social work though. I knew I'd be in the helping profession somewhere
Okay.
until someone that I looked up to and admired,
Mm-hmm.
who was a social worker, said that I would be good at it.
Okay.
And so I kind of took that to heart and kind of looked at the field then, and yeah, it made sense to me.
So it wasn't your initial career path going into college?
No, going
Okay.
into college, I didn't really have a career path.
Okay.
In fact, I really thought about not wanting to go to college because of that. Nothing.
Mhm.
I mean, I knew I could do a lot of things and do them
Mhm.
well, but nothing really jumped out at me.
Okay. Okay.
So no, it wasn't where I started. I didn't really start anywhere until it jumped at me.
So it was that person that really just kind of brought it out in you.
More or less motivated me towards social work.
Okay.
Yes, I hadn't thought about it. Like I said, I knew I'd be in the helping professions.
Mm-hmm.
I had thought about nursing actually the first
Really?
time I had thought about
Okay.
anything helping related.
Mm-hmm.
But then all the extra schooling needed with that kind of turned me off.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah, at that time I kind of looked at the easy way out, I guess. But
Yeah. Okay.
not that social work was the easy
Yeah.
way out. I didn't know a lot about it
Yeah.
until that person had mentioned things to me, and then I took an interest in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the different jobs you have held as a social worker, and what did you do in these jobs?
I've done a lot. The first one I got out of college, right out of college, was an in-home worker.
Okay.
Just helping families that were having kids either in trouble with the law or CHIPS, child protection
Okay.
services. So I did that. I did that only for 6 months. I had some personal things going on.
Yeah.
To be honest, I kind of felt like at the time I didn't know what I was doing in that job.
Yeah.
I was lucky for a couple cases to partner with an experienced teammate that kind of knew what he was doing when we went out. Well, obviously he did, but
Mm-hmm.
it was just scary to me. And
Mm-hmm.
because of the personal things going on, I left that job.
Mhm.
Then the first one I got after that was working at Quakerdale as a house parent.
Okay.
I would pack my suitcase and stay there for 4 days, and then I'd
Oh,
have
wow.
4 days off.
Okay.
And it just went back and forth like that
Okay.
the whole time. But I was a house parent living right in the home for those 4 days with
Okay.
8 kids that resided in the home. After that, I went into child protection.
Okay.
I took a short job working as a job coach for a DD
Okay.
client, but I didn't like that job at all. So I probably only stayed in that for about 4 to 6 months, but then from there got the job at a county DHS.
Okay.
And the first one, I was basically an intake worker.
Mm-hmm.
Did intake for the entire agency, and that
Yeah.
was for child protection. I was called an access worker. We took referrals for child protection, adult DD clients, therapy, counseling that went through our office as well, and then mental health services.
Okay.
So, and then the first 2 years you were there, you had to be on call.
Okay. Okay.
Which was kind of weird because you knew the least, being there new,
Yeah.
but for 2 years, but that's how I learned everything.
Mm-hmm.
So besides doing the access phones for 2 or 3 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
we also did all the child protection investigations.
Oh, wow.
And I
Okay.
did daycare certification at that time too.
Okay.
But it was a great learning ground in
Yeah.
all of those areas.
I bet.
And then when, talking about interviewing, when someone requested services from the agency, we also did the initial social history
Okay.
with the people that
Wow.
came in for all of those types of services.
Wow.
So we had to learn a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was great.
Yeah.
It was
So
great.
you've kind of delved into everything.
Yeah.
I guess that's That's very interesting.
I stayed there for 6 years, and then from there I went to a different county. This
Mhm.
was in Wisconsin.
Okay.
A different county in Wisconsin that did only child protection.
Okay.
So I just had to take, excuse me, I just had to take calls 1 or 2 days a week there,
Mhm.
and then we rotated as to
Okay.
getting assigned for cases and then investigate.
Wow. Okay.
Which included juvenile court.
Mhm.
We had to be a juvenile court intake worker, appointed that by the judge as well.
Wow.
And then we actually placed the kids
Okay.
if we had jurisdiction. So I did that for 15 years.
So what do you exactly do in the what did you do in the juvenile court? Sorry.
At that time?
Yeah.
Well, actually, now that I say that, I had to do that in the first county as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
And we also were juvenile court workers there.
Okay.
So we actually met with kids and families there for their first, we took referrals on that as well. And met with
Okay.
kids and families and actually made the decision whether to refer them actually to the juvenile court or
Okay.
to do an informal agreement
Okay.
with them.
Yeah.
If we did an informal agreement with them, then usually the case went to an ongoing
Okay.
social worker or counselor that had the case. Sometimes we'd follow one though too. If we just put them on for a month or two to see how everything went, then we'd
Mhm.
keep that case as well. As an intake worker in Fond du Lac County, the second county I worked in, we just referred them to intake,
Mhm.
and there were other intake workers there, but
Mhm.
when our case came up with an intake worker, then we'd go along and provide input to the referral we made and help make the decision as to what would happen with the case.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Very
it was a
cool.
lot, but I liked it. I
Yeah.
loved it. I loved doing intakes.
Yeah.
I loved doing child protection.
Yeah, definitely.
When I moved back to Iowa, but I was in those two counties for a total of 15 years. I did child protection. Came back to Iowa, and then I went to the other side of the line and
Yeah.
became an in-home worker here.
Okay. Okay.
I did a lot of visits. That was
Mhm.
through Mid-Iowa
Okay.
in Waterloo. I supervised a lot of visits for kids that were in foster care,
Mhm.
child abuse cases.
Okay.
I'd go pick up the kids from the foster home, take them to their family,
Wow.
and supervise the visits. And then also did some in-home counseling
Okay.
services with them as well.
Okay.
Was a real support to the families. You would kind of liken that today to I'm blanking on what it's called. There's a worker for DHS now through like Lutheran Social Services or
Okay.
other agencies like that where they do the safety and risk assessments on the
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't think of what they're specifically called right now.
Okay. Mhm.
But they were like the family safety worker.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did back then, but they didn't call it that.
All right.
But they assessed the risk, offered services to the family,
Mhm.
made sure that the family was getting all the services that they
Mhm.
needed, made referrals, things
Mhm.
like that.
All right. Very interesting.
And then became a BHIS worker
Yeah.
after that, when it all went from
Yeah.
being called an in-home worker to a BHIS worker.
Yeah.
Then I did BHIS. I have a lot of history. I've done this for 35 years.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I started
Okay.
I graduated from Wartburg in '83
Nice.
and then started my career, like I said, right out of school. So
Mhm.
after that it was called BHIS. I think you did that for about 6 years.
Mhm.
And then my most recent job, besides the one I have now, was at Operation Threshold
Okay.
in Waterloo. I
Mhm.
did the Parents as Teachers program,
Okay.
going into the homes and from ages basically prenatal until 5, helping
Mhm.
the parent become their first teacher. You know,
Mhm.
focusing
Wow.
on those first 5 years
Yeah.
of brain development and growth and all
Yeah.
that, helping the parents
Wow.
help their kids. And then most recently,
Mhm.
just this past August, I've been employed by Four Oaks,
Okay.
and I'm the adoption specialist.
Okay.
For families that are either in pre-adoption or have adopted children.
Okay.
I help them with any issues or concerns they have.
Okay. Do you do any training with them?
No.
Okay.
First I interviewed to be a caseworker, and
Mhm.
I would have had to do trainings then.
Okay.
Do you mean provide training?
Yeah, so Yeah.
I wasn't comfortable with that.
That's fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I turned that job down, actually.
Okay.
And then about 2 or 3 months later, the adoption specialist job came up.
Okay.
And we don't have to do training. And
Okay.
once you become an adoptive parent, you're
Yeah.
more or less done with your training.
Yeah.
I could provide trainings through them if I wanted to, but that's just not for me.
Okay.
Don't like to get up in front of people
Yeah.
and teach and.
Yeah, that's
and-
fair.
And speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what I've realized at this last interview that I had for a job was every job I've had has been in the home. From
Okay.
child
Yeah,
protection,
That's true.
all the way around. I feel
Yeah.
like being on the adoption end now, I've kind of gone all the way through.
There you go,
I
yeah.
was on one end of taking children
Yeah.
out of parents' custody if needed. And then started working with those people that had their children taken out,
Mhm.
did BHIS
Mhm.
as well. And now I'm on the end providing support to the people that adopted those
Yeah.
children if they couldn't go back home. So it's kind of
Full circle.
full circle to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's been a good career.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Mhm.
So
Especially for not even knowing I wanted it at
Yeah,
first.
exactly.
mhm.
So what is the most interesting job that you've held, and what made it interesting?
I think it had to be the child protection because you have to look at things differently.
Mhm.
I wasn't about attachment
Yeah.
or trauma or
Yeah.
any of that at that time, although
Mhm.
a lot of that wasn't out when I started it. It wasn't
Mhm.
as important. But it was all protection. I had to make sure these kids were safe.
Yeah.
And so you had to kind of look at it that way, and if you're not in the field and learn it, you don't
Mhm.
really get it.
Mhm.
Like a lot of people, when I'd say what I do for a job, they just kind of look at me like, wow, you do that?
Yeah.
How can you do that?
Yeah.
And so it takes a different kind of mindset. So that was
Mhm.
interesting to me, that I actually had that mindset and learned that mindset.
Mhm.
And you ran into, this was I think the most interesting, all kinds of people.
Mm.
All kinds of people.
Yeah.
From every walk of life.
Mhm.
It wasn't really one population, even though it was alleged abuse and neglect, but
Yeah.
your clientele varied,
Yeah.
just every kind of person there was.
Yeah.
And, you had to be respectful to them too.
Yeah. So you'd say the thing that surprised you the most was just the range of people you saw?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how prevalent
Mhm.
alleged abuse and neglect was. I was
Mm.
knocked off my chair.
Yeah.
The first case I ever went out with another worker on that, the victims were like a 4 and 5-year-old boy, a brother and sister, and the alleged perpetrator was the 16-year-old son of their daycare provider. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I had
Yeah.
never thought about that before, that you had
Yeah.
to even be aware of your kids when they were in your
Yeah.
babysitter's care. And
Mhm.
it kind of just blew me away. So
Yeah.
it really opened my eyes to the world and how prevalent it was. Because
Yeah.
that's the other thing, was it happens everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
you have to be aware all the time.
Yeah, that can really just kind of take you back a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
just open your eyes, I
It
guess.
did open my
Yeah.
eyes. It did open my eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. A
Wow.
lot of growing up in that job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So then on the other side of that, what would you say is the most challenging job that you've ever had?
Well, as far as knowing myself and what I could and couldn't do, obviously I learned that the DD population wasn't for me.
Yeah.
That was a challenge in that I didn't like it. I
Yeah.
just couldn't stay with it and make myself like it and feel
Yeah.
helpful and productive. So
Okay.
that's why I didn't stay in that job long.
Okay.
It's challenging. I guess on the other side, they were all challenging as to what they presented. You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Mhm.
I guess I'd have to say again the CPS.
Okay.
Because, you had to learn to be comfortable with going up to people's doors and knocking on the door
Yeah.
and being confrontive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, trying to connect with them so that they talk to you.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the beginning didn't see me having a personality that could do that.
Interesting. Okay.
But I kind of used that as fuel for the fire, and and I'm not afraid to say it, I got very good at it. I was
Yeah.
very respected
Yeah.
in those 2 counties for the job, and I learned it from one of the best social workers out there.
Yeah.
She was awesome.
Yeah.
I learned everything from her until I got on my own.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that was tough too, to realize
Yeah.
what I could do.
Yeah.
And I stuck with it, you
Yeah.
know.
It's really pretty amazing what you can learn about yourself in
Mhm.
jobs that challenge you.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, what is the current job that you have, and what do you do in this job?
Well, as I told you, I'm the adoption support
Mhm.
specialist for 15 counties in the service area.
Mhm.
There are 27 counties in our western, that's what it is, southwestern, I don't know. It's a northern area, and I
Yeah.
can show you a map, but there are 15 counties that I cover, all the adoptive or
Wow.
pre-adoptive families in that area.
Yeah.
And then my coworker in this area has 12 other counties, including
Okay.
Waterloo, Cedar Falls. She has a
Mhm.
bigger area,
Okay.
a metro area, so that's why I have 12 more counties than her.
Okay.
Mine are more remote.
Yeah.
But basically, I just cold call
Really?
these adoptive families
Yeah.
and explain the program to them, tell them that I'm their support person,
Okay.
and you know what help do you need with?
Mhm.
You need help dealing with your children's behaviors. You need help. You have questions about the subsidy, the adoption subsidy, and how to
Mhm.
get a hold of the worker.
Mhm.
The other thing I'm just getting going right now is setting up adoption support groups for these people.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, I've got 2 going already, and I'm
Okay.
working on 2 more right now.
Okay.
It's kind of slow going, but I think it'll catch on.
So, are you the facilitator for those then, or?
Yeah, in the
Okay.
beginning, what I want it to become is them just kind of leading it themselves as
Mhm.
far as, you know, what do you guys want to talk about? What do you
Yeah.
need help with? And I'll always be there,
Yeah,
of
definitely.
course, but it's going to be their group, kind of
Okay.
like more support for them than me just leading things. And when we get started, if they want trainings, I'll provide them with information
Yeah,
and
definitely.
answer questions and have speakers come in and all that. But you know, it's going to be up to them though and what they want.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, I'm considered the facilitator, I
Okay.
guess.
Okay. Very neat.
And I'm comfortable in that,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
to opposed to having people come in and train them in CPR.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah.
I'm
So.
not a CPR trainer.
Yeah.
If I wanted to be, I'd do that. you
That's
know,
fair.
So
Yeah.
I'm too old to mess with it. So
Yeah.
anyway.
So you said that you've been in the field for 35 years now, and social work is very well known for its high burnout rate.
Mhm.
So in these 35 years, what has kept you motivated to keep going with this job?
Well, I learned that I could do it. I learned that I was good at it.
Yeah.
I do know that I can connect with people,
Mhm.
and I know that if I don't know, you know, their service needs and what they need, I can figure that out with them. So I feel that I can help. It still goes back to that helping
Yeah.
people, and
Mhm.
you know, I've learned that I can do it. You also though need to have the right mindset that, you know, not everybody's going to want to take the help that I want to offer.
Yeah.
And just meet them where they're at.
Mhm.
That's the most important thing, I guess,
Yeah.
to get started is where are you and what do you need?
Mhm.
You know, sometimes we can see more that they need, but if they're not ready to take it, they're, you know,
Yeah.
they're not gonna get it.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay with that as long as, you know, they're not being harmed in any way.
Yeah.
You also, you know, you need your outside things.
Yeah.
You know, you really
Yeah.
do. I was always good with leaving it at the office.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to do that.
Yeah.
That prevents burnout right there.
Mhm.
And you know, having your supports.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of figuring out what works for you and making sure that you keep everything separate has been really helpful for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've always got that heart.
Yeah.
If you're a good social worker, you've got that heart in no matter what you do. But yeah,
Mhm.
you've got to separate that from this.
Mhm.
And still keep the heart, but
Yeah.
you know, just keeping it separate, and knowing who your supports are
Yeah.
and depending on them.
Yeah. So you would say that it's okay to separate it, but understanding that just because you're separating it doesn't necessarily mean your heart isn't in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there have been times, of course, confidentially, that I've
Yeah.
needed to talk to people about a certain case or a certain story and just
Mhm.
spit it out there to
Yeah.
someone to stay sane. But you
Yeah.
know, not everybody gets that. You
Yeah.
know, even when I worked in the group home,
Yeah.
this was my parents. Like, I would try to talk to them about, geez, you wouldn't believe this kid I met now and what their issue is. And my parents would just look at me like, why do you go live with them?
Yeah.
Because I want to, you know, they're good kids. They're good kids, but yeah, some people just don't relate, but yet you still have to be comfortable with someone to just get it out there for your support.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, you're very passionate, I can tell.
And not be offended when they don't understand.
Yeah.
Because like I said, not everybody's going to understand what we do and why we want to do it.
Yes, because there's always that stigma of social workers are only here to take my children, especially in the professions you've been in.
Exactly.
Yes. Interesting. Awesome. So we're going to kind of shift a little bit, and we're going to start talking about ethics.
Okay.
And so as social workers, we deal with ethics a lot. And so how have ethics come into play into your professional career?
Well, obviously confidentiality is in every job you have, and that's a biggie. You know, if not number one, it's a biggie. So that comes into play everywhere, just everywhere. You've got to be thinking about that all the time. And always, you know, with a client, make sure you have permission to do anything you do before you do it. However, there have been times when I know that I've, you know, maybe broken a big rule of ethics, but there are times you have to do it, I believe.
Okay.
For example, one I can give you is accepting gifts. Before I worked in Fond du Lac County, this girl had been sexually abused. Parents' rights were terminated. She was adopted into a family. I came, you know, by the time I was there then, another allegation had come in. This time it was her adoptive father, and it was sexual assault.
Wow, yeah.
So basically, her parental rights were terminated again by her adoptive family because of abuse. And from that home, she didn't go to another foster home. She went to a residential treatment facility for placement. But we had really bonded. Even when an ongoing worker took over the case as the case manager, I stayed involved, and I went along to have her placed at this facility, and we kind of worked hand in hand, even though I wasn't involved in the case anymore. These two workers, she and I. Well, this girl, at the time of placement, just became she was so grateful to us, and you know, loved us, and we loved her, and she had given me like a 4x5 school picture of herself, and she, you know, made a frame for it, made the frame by hand, and she made one for Nancy too, my other coworker, and she gave it. I have goosebumps right now. And she gave that to us. Because she was so thankful that we believed her, we got her out of that situation. She was so thrilled to go to a residential treatment facility where hopefully no one abused her further. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell that girl, no, I can't take this. So we each of us, and you know, Nancy was like 58 at the time. I was like 35, and I'm like, well, if Nancy's accepting her gift, I'm accepting my gift. But we both, I mean, there's no way I'm not going to take that from her. You know. But what I did was set it up in my office, you know, so that she could see it. You know, when she came in, and a lot of times I kept it in a place where it wouldn't show, only to me, because again, you're thinking about confidentiality. What if someone comes in here and sees her picture and asks me who that is and why? Of course, I wouldn't answer it, but you know, you have to think about that. Let me see. There was another good example I had. But you know, I accepted a gift once from the mother that I was investigating. She had some Indian blood in her, and she made me a dream catcher, and then a whole letter explaining how I had helped her by pointing out what she was doing to her child. And it's like, I'm not going to say no. But the best thing to do if you accept something like that is keep it somewhere. You know, if they give you flowers, set them out in the entryway where you share it with everyone. You know, these were things that obviously I kept personally, but yet mindful of. You know, it meant more for them to give it to me than me to take it, so that's why I took it. Do you know what I mean? It was for them.
So it's just understanding that line of what's not necessarily okay, but then also saying, you know, this is important for them, and understanding that they need that just as
Mhm.
much as you do.
And the other important thing to remember with that is to consult though with it. With each
Okay.
of those gifts, I went to my supervisor and I said,
Yeah.
you know, here's this.
Okay. Yeah.
Here's what it means to her. This is what she shared with me. Well,
Mhm.
you know, and luckily I had supervisors that got it too in those two instances and said, yeah, you gotta
Mhm.
keep it.
Okay.
So, you know,
Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
gotta really walk the line, but yet,
Definitely.
and make sure you get support in what you do.
Okay.
The support of who's above you and consult about it.
Yeah.
Geez, I had another instance too, but I'm losing it now.
Yeah.
But those are some,
Mhm.
some examples.
Okay.
Any other specific areas you wanted to ask about with ethics?
I was thinking more to kind of go off of that as well. Was there an ethical dilemma that you came across that you can think of that you're like, oh, maybe I should have handled that a little differently than I did? Or on the other side, was there an ethical dilemma that you thought, yeah, I handled that really well, and I'm proud of that?
Well, this might fit.
Okay.
I went out on an investigation, a physical abuse investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Little kids,
Mm-hmm.
probably 5 and under. There were
Mhm.
probably 4 of them, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And 2-year-old little boy, you know, he only stood
Mhm.
about that tall.
Mm.
He had like a perfect handprint on his cheek.
Wow.
And I went to a hospital setting. They called us in. And if you had the sense when you went out on a case that you were going to need placement or
Mhm.
there were going to be criminal charges,
Mm-hmm.
we'd take law enforcement with us from the start, just to,
Okay.
you know, less traumatize the child. They'd only have to say it once instead of
Definitely.
referring it to law enforcement later, and the child has to be
Mhm.
interviewed again, or, you know, there's a chance their short story would change. And
Yeah.
so anyway, I had an officer meet me there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the doctor's office had called it in,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and generally we can't say who the reporter was, but, you know, I'm
Mhm.
no longer there, and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, mandated reporters,
Mm-hmm.
it's confidential, but anyway, so I had this doctor obviously feeling that it was abuse, and the officer didn't.
Interesting. Okay.
And for me, the ethical dilemma then became, do I place this kid, or do I
Yeah.
leave him at home under conditions, actually all of them,
Mm-hmm.
because they were so young, leave them at home under conditions that, you know, they don't use any type of physical abuse, blah, blah, blah. You know, is there a safety person I can leave in this home
Yeah.
that can tell me that they're gonna monitor this and be present at all times? And
Yeah.
that person became the mom. Of course, she could be
Yeah.
there all the time. The dad was the alleged abuser. She would be
Mhm.
there at all times. She would supervise all of their contact, you know, and then you have to think, well, is she able to do that?
Yeah.
Is she just telling me this, or,
Yeah.
you know, can she really do that, or does he have power and control over her too, that she can't be their safety person?
Okay.
But basically, because I knew the officer was wrong,
Yeah.
but at the same time, because of his opinion,
Mm-hmm.
my initial decision was, and I had a student shadowing me that day.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So
Oh, wow.
my initial decision was, all right, we're going to leave them here with this safety in place. They signed a safety plan, blah blah blah. I'm going to go back to my office and get an ongoing worker involved right away, and blah blah blah. So we all leave the hospital, and Molly was the student. She gets in the car with me, and I get about 3 blocks from that hospital, and I look at Molly and I say, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I was like asking her questions, like,
Mhm.
Molly, what do you think of this and that and that? She
Yeah.
was kind of like my bouncing it off person.
Yeah.
Finally, I said, hey, we need to go back. I cannot
Yeah.
leave these kids there.
Yeah.
And again, it was safety based, but does this qualify for where you're
Oh,
considering
I would say
ethical
yes.
dilemma?
I would say yes.
To me, it was a safety thing, but
Yeah.
anyway, I called that officer and I said, you know, I'm sorry, but I need you to come back and help me take these kids into custody.
Yeah.
And he was good enough to say, okay, this is your call, because, you know, from there on, it was our case. I don't think there were any criminal charges
Mm-hmm.
in that, but he did come back and help me place them into
That's
custody, and then I, you know, had to find a foster home and took them there and everything. But
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that was the
Wow.
ethical dilemma. I kind of let that officer's opinion sway me a little bit in the moment. you know, and I did have an adult saying, yes, I will supervise and keep these children safe. But yet, my gut was telling me,
Yeah.
I don't think so, you know? And they were so little,
Yeah.
so that, you know, there was a younger one than him yet. But, yeah, we placed them all 4.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow.
It went,
Yeah.
I mean, in my mind, even before anybody knew it, I was back and forth with that the whole time we were there,
Yeah.
you know?
So would you say a lot of times in ethical dilemma situations, your gut is usually going to be right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the bottom, and if you've been doing it for a while and your gut is just telling you, you know, this is right, yeah.
Okay.
If I were a new worker at that time and didn't know, I probably would have taken someone else's opinion, but before I got back to my supervisor, I knew I had to turn that car around and go change it, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The parents weren't happy, but
Yeah.
they had no say at that
Yeah.
point.
That's fair.
So, yeah, that
That's fair.
was a tough one.
Yeah.
That was a tough one.
That does seem really, really rough.
One where, and I did feel good afterwards.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have slept all night and probably
Yeah.
would have had issues for days had I not done that. I did have another one where this was the case of my lifetime. Basically, it was a long story, but nobody could ever get in that house. Well, when we got there, I got there with an officer, and we were sitting outside the house. No one answered the door when we knocked. All of a sudden, the mom comes out the door. We were still sitting in the car. Another worker and I and an officer. So, of course, we go nab her. She takes us in the house, and she had her 6 children locked into a room with big blankets over the windows. It was pitch dark in here. They had a cooler with a little bit of food in it for them to eat, and they had injuries all over their bodies. Yeah.
And she willingly took you into that room?
Well, she knew she was caught.
Okay.
I think
I was
if
gonna
she'd
say.
have got, I'm like, where are you going? She's like, to work. I said, well, where are the kids? She's like, inside. You know, I had an officer with me. I said, can we go in and look? And she took us in there and unlocked the door, and there they were.
Wow.
It turned out to be a case of my life. She was criminally charged. Her boyfriend was criminally charged. But what I did that night was I took them all to a foster home. The boy that was supposedly the problem, who could have been a poster child for child abuse, he had a big boot mark, footprint mark. He had bruises all over his face. They were white as ghosts. This kid had marks and bite marks all over his body, and so did his older sister. He went to our shelter care, and the rest I found foster homes for. All of them. The next day was a Saturday. I got up, this friend and I again got up Saturday morning, went and picked them all up, took them to a doctor so that they could be examined. You know, none of them were acting ill or hurt to the point where I think I had to go to the ER right away.
Yeah.
But we picked them up the very next day, went to the doctor, had them all examined. Number 1, that documented my abuse, but number 2, I had to prove they were all right, prove that they were safe. And where that became, it wasn't really an ethical dilemma to me at that point because I knew what I was doing and that had to be done. It was cut and dried. It was the biggest abuse case I'd ever seen. I mean, this boy had been hammered, closed into a dark closet by himself with no food, handcuffed. He and his older sister were handcuffed to the pipes under the sink in the bathroom when Mom would leave. The person that called it in to me that same day we went out there had said that they were all in this bedroom, and he had the window open, and he had started a lawnmower outside and put it upside down, and then he took rocks in the room with him and was throwing them out into the lawnmower and, you know, shooting them all over. That's what these kids were doing for entertainment. All the kids were laughing, and so, I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on in that family. It turned out later that she had abused all of them and actually stabbed him before with a knife. And it was bad. It was a bad case. But where it became so obvious to me that I did the right thing is when in one of the court hearings, actually. I testified 3 days in a row for the criminal case of that. Because there was juvenile court, but then she and her boyfriend were charged criminally as well. And her defense attorney was asking me about that day. He's like, "Are you a doctor?" I said, "No." "Well, what are you?" I'm a social worker.
Yeah.
Well, why did you take these children to the doctor then? What was it about their injuries that made you think they had to go to a doctor? And I said, well, I didn't know. I said, you know, I saw these injuries outside of them. How did I know there weren't other ones inside of them? You know, I needed to take them to a doctor to find out. I said, I didn't know, and that's why I did take them to a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not thinking you're a doctor. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor. That's why I took them.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, what led you to do that if you're not a doctor and can't make a medical decision? And I said, common sense. I didn't know what else to say at that point, but arguing with him, you know, I just felt like I did what I did for these kids, and I am damn proud of that. You know what I mean? It's like, you're trying to make me look like a fool, and you're kind of only making yourself look like a fool. I know exactly what I did and why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the only defense he had, but I remember sitting up there just thinking, I don't know why I did this.
Yeah.
And it's what they needed. And I know, at least that oldest boy, I saved his life.
Yeah.
I think it would have gotten to the point where she would have eventually killed him because she blamed everything on him.
Yeah.
You know, and the kids lied at first about all their injuries too, but as time went on, it came out. But when you mentioned that I felt really proud afterwards and that I had done the right thing, just that lawyer grilling me like that made me think, I did damn well. You know, I saved his life.
Yeah.
You know,
just no question in your mind.
Oh, absolutely none.
It was definitely the right thing. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Wow.
Because a lot of times in that job, you don't have that feeling.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's like, oh God, did I do the right thing?
Yeah.
You know, even in placing them, I didn't know a lot or care much about attachment at that point, but yet when you take a kid from their family, even to save them and prevent them from being hurt, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's their family.
Yeah.
That's blood.
Yeah.
And so many times if I left him in the home, then I'd question too, oh my God, I hope he doesn't get hurt tonight. Or so you don't have a lot of that feeling in that job until maybe down the road.
Wow.
But I'll never forget that because I knew that with that case. You know?
That's pretty incredible.
It was awesome.
Wow. Yeah, that makes you just feel so much better, right? When you're able to get through that horrible, horrible situation and then come out the other side and just confidently you were able to say, I did that. I did right by those kids.
Yeah. And then, you know, I remember another girl. She was probably 12.
Mm-hmm.
And she was Hmong. We had a big Hmong population in Fond du Lac.
Mm-hmm.
And I had met the family before that, you know, a lot of referrals kept coming in on them, but nothing that we could really do anything about. Well, as it turned out, she was more or less the scapegoat of the family. And I remember one of the main things she told me that day was, you know, her dad would, at mealtime, you know, just take her face and grab her by the back of the hair and slam her face down into her bowl of rice and just humiliate her and make her eat that way. Well, you know, just all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I called intake and they're like, yeah, let's place her. And I was actually, it's hard to get emotional abuse. It really is hard. But that was part of what was going on that day. I think there were other neglectful things going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I placed her. Well, then, when you place them, you have a detention hearing within 24 hours. At least in Wisconsin, you did back then. I don't know all the law now, but it goes to the DA then, and he'll decide whether the child stays in placement, whether we're going to have a detention hearing, or whether they go back home.
Okay.
Well, he didn't feel there was enough to get emotional abuse or neglect or anything going on in this home, even though it was awful.
Yeah.
And so her name was Elizabeth, and the next day I had to go take Elizabeth back home. Oof. Now talk about feeling awful.
Yeah.
I mean, so those kind of cases you had too, where you tried and you wanted to do what you could for these kids, but and the DA felt awful.
Yeah.
Because he really respected me and liked me, and we got along great. He felt awful too, but I had to go pick her up from the home she was in and take her home. Yeah. It was just awful.
I can't imagine how horrible that feeling would be.
So you have to learn how to let that go though too. And, you know, the law's there for a reason. You can't just take any kid and away from their parents, but yet, you know, it's awful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Would you say that's the hardest part is when you know you have to bring that child back.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it is. It
Okay.
is. Because when you're out there doing it, you kind of get into a zone where you're just doing what you have to do and you know your job and you're going to do it.
Mhm.
And you don't feel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, to see these kids going through that,
Yeah.
but you got to like toughen it up right there and just be non-emotional.
Yeah.
You know, it's afterwards when you have to do something like that that you
Yeah.
are emotional. And again, that's when you need your people and your
Mhm.
support to say, hey, you did what you could. It's going to come up again.
Mhm.
And that happened many times too. There was
Mhm.
this family that we knew something was going on, and you know, you get your chronic referrals from these people, but you
Mhm.
can't do anything about it. Well, two of the biggest one in the county, I finally got something on, and
Yeah.
so you know that, and you pray.
Yeah.
You pray that, you know, they're watched over and that maybe someday something can happen.
Yeah.
And that did happen in some
Yeah.
cases. I don't think ever with Elizabeth again that I was aware of, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Man, that can be really tough.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. So kind of to start wrapping things up a little bit, I wanted to ask you a couple of more questions regarding me going into things, just because you've been in the field for a while and I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
So do you have anything that you wish you would have known before getting into the field of social work?
Yeah. Actually, and I think you guys do it now, so hopefully it's nothing that you'll ever have to experience in the way I did, but back in my day in college, we didn't work on ourselves first.
Oh, okay.
Like, I hear that these days kids have to basically go through therapy in in their schooling before, you know, not go get a counselor and everything, but you gotta work through your own stuff.
Yeah.
And your family stuff, or at least be made aware of that it's there and it's gonna come up.
Okay.
We weren't taught that.
Yeah.
We weren't taught that at all.
Okay.
So, kind of when I went into into the jobs, I didn't really know I had family stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and basically, I grew up fine, but yet everybody's got their stuff.
Mhm.
And I remember one day in that first DHS job, I was doing a social history with a man who was a farmer, and he was having thoughts of suicide and depression.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm sitting there doing this with him while I have an uncle that committed suicide
Yeah.
by hanging himself in a barn.
Okay.
And my dad was a farmer too, and after my uncle did that, I was afraid that my dad was going to do it too.
Okay.
That was just where
Yeah.
my kid mind went at age 9, you know, like, oh my goodness, if my uncle can do that, can my dad?
Yeah.
And so, you know, that affected me
Mhm.
as a kid. And that man that sat there telling me his story kind of resembled my dad. He had
Yeah.
dark hair, he had a beard.
Mhm.
I mean, he looked a lot like my dad, and we're talking about suicide on a
Mhm.
farm.
Mhm.
Well, that just brought up a lot of issues for me and kind of put depression issues out front for me. And
Mhm.
it just opened my eyes to a lot of things that had been going on in me and depression in me for a long time that I
Mhm.
hadn't even realized.
Yeah.
But he walked out of that door that day, and I thought to myself, I'm just like him.
Mm.
You know, I've probably been depressed for a long time and I don't even know it. So there was
Mhm.
a lot going on there with my
Mhm.
past,
Yeah.
and it came up.
Mhm.
And we were never taught that.
Yeah.
So it's great that you guys,
Yeah.
I mean, take advantage of that. If you've
Mhm.
got professors or you deal with that kind of stuff, do it now because
Yeah.
it's going to come up.
So are you kind of talking about like how we do our own genograms and stuff like that, or more specifically, what do you?
Well,
what do you
maybe
mean by that?
Warburg doesn't do this, but I know
Mhm.
other programs. Well, this was in Wisconsin of one of my coworkers in one of my earlier jobs. She's like, they had to basically go through therapy with
Interesting.
their
Mhm.
professors
Mhm.
as far as what their what their issues were, because your issues are going to get brought out in
Yeah.
the field somewhere, probably depending on what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that was never brought to light with us.
Okay.
It's kind of like, you're going to go out there and help people. People aren't always going to like you for
Yeah.
it, and you're going to have to still fight for what you believe and
Mhm.
blah blah blah. But we were never really taught, your stuff's going to come up.
Okay.
So yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
if you have somebody that gets that and
Mhm.
wants to help you through it,
Mhm.
maybe pay attention to that,
Definitely.
no matter what your stuff is.
Awesome.
Because it was hard being 35 years old out there, and all of a sudden all my stuff was coming up, and I had to continue the job while I was still going through
Yeah.
this.
And it just wasn't something you were prepared for.
No,
Yeah.
no, I
Okay.
didn't know what happened.
Yeah.
you
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
So, but it's probably going to hit you if
Yeah.
you run across the right client.
Yeah.
So
So-
just know what your stuff is.
Yeah.
And be aware to deal with it and deal with it. Because you
Okay.
can't help anybody else if you're too struggling with your own stuff.
Yeah.
And it helps sway your opinions too. So you got to
Yeah.
learn to look at it objectively.
Okay. All right.
And then talking about being out there and fighting for people,
Mhm.
I didn't really get in college the social action part
Okay.
of social work.
Okay.
We talked about it.
Mhm.
My professor was big into it, but
Mhm.
I wasn't a, hey, go out there and,
Yeah.
fight the world kind of person in college. I
Okay.
was kind of reserved and sat back and listened.
Okay.
I understood things. I wish now I'd have done more back then younger.
Okay.
I'm really into the political scene now and what's going on in this world. And
Yeah.
we got to do something about it.
Yeah.
But I wish I'd have done that younger. So
Okay.
at a younger age, so maybe that aspect too. I would wish I had known how important the social, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
The social
yeah.
reform and
Yeah.
the social activism is.
Mhm.
I didn't really believe that back then or get
Okay.
into it. But
Yeah.
I wish I had, because it's very important
Okay.
that we fight for change.
Yeah, definitely. I would say so.
All right.
And then the last question I have for you, do you have any knowledge to impart upon a social work student?
Well, hopefully I've given you some
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, that big one is trust your gut.
Mhm.
Even if you don't feel like you're changing people and helping people, know
Mhm.
that you are,
Okay.
okay?
Mhm.
You've got to believe in what you're doing, and you might not see the results,
Mhm.
but you're making change. You're making impact, okay? You really
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
Yeah, trust your gut. Use your supports,
Mhm.
and believe that you're doing good in the world, even if you can't feel it.
Mhm. Awesome. Okay. Well, those are all of the questions I have for you.
Okay.
Do you have anything for me, maybe?
Well, I just want to know a little bit about you.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
So I'm from Oskaloosa,
Okay.
southeast. So yeah, I came to Wartburg, and I was not planning on being a social work major at all.
Okay.
I was planning on being history ed. And I knew I wanted to be there for people and help people, but freshman year, very quickly realized education was not the route for me.
Okay.
And then I just kept on getting like this feeling of, you should check out social work. Don't really know where it came from. I'd never really heard of it before, kind of like you had.
Mhm.
And then I ended up talking to Lynn Peters and Tammy Fox,
Okay.
and they kind of convinced me. They're like, yeah, we could see what you're, like, because I told them my interests and stuff like that. We could see you working well in this department. And so we kind of did like a preliminary thing, seeing if I would like it. And here I am, a junior, and I am getting
So
ready
you're a junior.
for all that fun
Awesome.
stuff next year with my senior placement.
So now you know it's right.
Yeah,
Good.
definitely. I am very, very happy.
Good.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's who I am.
Okay. And
Yeah.
you're a junior.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a field you're thinking you might like?
Mhm.
In the area?
I'm looking a lot into forensic social work or prison social work.
Nice.
Yes, I have always had this weird passion for like true crime and stuff. That's always
Me
really
too.
kind of interested me. And so then when I found out I could actually work in prisons
Mhm.
as a social worker, I was like, heck yeah,
Mhm.
that sounds exactly like what I want to do.
Yeah.
So
There is a correctional facility right in Oshkosh where
Mhm.
I lived when I first went to Wisconsin.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
had gone in there a few times to meet with people.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
intriguing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I love shows like 2020 and
Uh-huh.
and all those forensic files.
Yeah. Just binged the Ted Bundy tapes last weekend.
I just started watching it
It's
last
very
night.
interesting.
My internet is terrible, and sometimes I get Netflix and sometimes I don't. Last
Yeah.
night I got it, so
Yeah.
I watched the first two.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah. I'm
So that kind
into
of
that
stuff
too.
is very much so what I'm interested in.
Awesome.
So
That's
yeah.
great.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah. And RFI has kind of inspired me to hopefully someday do a prison pups program.
What's that?
So basically what RFI is Retrieving Freedom. They're the service dog
Oh,
facility.
okay.
So what would happen is we would bring the service dogs into the prisons, and it would either be a daily thing or it would be a full-time fostering kind of deal.
Mhm.
So the inmates would learn how to train the dogs, and
Cool.
I think that's a really, really impactful program.
Yeah,
'cause-
cool.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that you'd never thought of social work, because when I was a senior in high school
Mm-hmm.
and our teachers kept